Helen Phillips always dreamed of having a picture-perfect life, which involved having a loving husband, a beautiful home in the suburbs, and maybe even a child or two running around the backyard. She was born on the 26th of March in 1970 and grew up in a small Midwestern town where she had a fairly sheltered upbringing. Her parents were middle-class people who worked hard to take good care of her. Her father was a successful doctor who was very respected in his field, while her mother was a school teacher and she was also frequently involved in many different charitable organizations. Helen herself was a very bright and cheerful girl who excelled in school and was liked by her friends a lot. When she was in high school, she received a lot of attention from boys in her class because they thought she was pretty cute. She always said that she inherited her looks mostly from her mother. Helen had beautiful, naturally red lips that really went well with her green eyes. She also had a little bit of freckles on her face that made her look really cute to other boys. That's why she was popular in high school, and many girls envied her. Apart from being a looker, she was also pretty smart. Helen graduated high school with excellent grades as a valedictorian and then went off to college with high hopes for her future. She had a dream of perhaps becoming a writer someday. That's why she threw herself into her studies, learning all day every day for 4 years. In the end, she majored in English literature. However, it was during her senior year in college that she met Richard Brown at a friend's party. Richard was a business major, and he was a handsome young man with a charming personality. Helen was immediately attracted to him, and the two quickly became inseparable. When the two of them were dating, they were a very romantic couple. They showed each other affection every day. They also wrote love letters, even though that was a little before their time. And by the time they graduated college, they were engaged and ready to be married. Helen's parents were thrilled when they found out about it because they really loved Richard, and also because he came from a good and respectable family. Their wedding was absolutely magnificent, and they spared no expense. They married each other on the 23rd of September in 1995. While she was walking down the aisle in her beautiful white dress, she truly felt like a princess living out her fairy tale. After the wedding, they moved in and settled in a house they bought in the suburbs. Sometime later, Richard landed a job at a prestigious financial firm, while Helen decided to put her writing career on hold so she could be a housewife and help her husband with everything he needs. She wanted to create the perfect home. She decorated each and every room in the house and also planted a garden outside with a lot of beautiful flowers. Besides that, Helen spent a lot of her time in the kitchen and in the laundry room as well. She was a perfect housewife, and from the outside, their life seemed idyllic. But as the years went by, cracks began to form in their seemingly perfect marriage. Richard became really consumed by his work, and he often stayed late at the office and brought his work to bed. The romantic gestures that once swept Helen off her feet became few and far between. She found herself feeling lonely and unfulfilled, longing for the passion and excitement of their early days together. Then Helen tried to bring back the old days in their relationship. She planned romantic date nights and fun stuff to do together, but Richard always seemed distracted or too tired to be fully present with her. And then when she mentioned the topic of starting a family to him, he brushed her off, saying they weren't ready yet and that they didn't have enough money to support children. That's why her dream of becoming a mother started feeling increasingly out of reach. As she approached her mid-30s, Helen found herself stuck in a meaningless life. Her days were filled with mundane household chores that left her feeling empty. She started questioning the choices she made in her life and asked herself if this was truly all life had in store for her. The bright and ambitious girl who once dreamed of becoming a writer now felt like a shadow of herself. It was during this period that Helen met Ethan. He was the new gardener she hired to renovate their backyard. This happened in 2005, and Helen was 35 years old. From the moment he arrived at their home, Helen felt something in her stomach that she hadn't felt in years. Ethan was a 40-year-old man with strong working hands and a little bit of gray hair. He also had blue eyes and a really nice personality. While he worked outside, he wore a green cap on his head to protect him from the sun. Helen found herself watching him from the kitchen window and admiring his strong physique. Then what started as innocent small talk soon progressed into something more. Helen was looking forward to every Ethan's visit, and she made excuses to spend time with him in the backyard while he worked. Unlike Richard, Ethan seemed genuinely interested in Helen's thoughts and feelings. They bonded over their love of literature and art. For the first time in years, Helen felt truly seen by someone. Since the renovation of their backyard was coming to an end, Helen realized that she didn't want her time with Ethan to end. Then one afternoon, while they were discussing the final touches for the garden, their eyes met and suddenly both of them became speechless. Before any of them realized what was happening, they started kissing. Helen knew that this was wrong, but she couldn't resist the intense feelings she had for Ethan. But Ethan was kissing her back as well. He grew to like her very much over the course of his work. He loved her sincerity and the way she carried herself, and even though she was just a suburban housewife, he saw in her something more, something that even she forgot was in her. When she was telling him that her husband didn't want to spend time with her anymore, he felt really sorry for her, and he thought to himself, who wouldn't want to spend time with such an amazing woman? And on the other hand, she was still a looker. Even though she was in her mid-30s, she was still beautiful. When he saw her for the first time, he was struck by her beauty and those gorgeous lips of hers, but he remained professional and didn't say a word to her. Only when she approached him and started a conversation, he felt entitled to give her a few compliments. She immediately liked that and was happy because there was someone who saw her as something else than just a regular housekeeper. But when they finished kissing and looked each other in the eyes again, they realized that they wanted something more than just to kiss. So Ethan then picked up her skirt and pressed her against the wall. At that moment, she understood what was about to happen, and even though she knew that it was wrong, she felt extremely happy about it. She loved the fact that there was a man who wanted her body for pleasure and not just for work around the house. Still, Ethan was a good man. He realized that Helen was a married woman with a hard-working husband that doesn't deserve this. He started having doubts about it, and so he decided to stop. But Helen looked at him with those beautiful eyes of hers and said that she wanted this. She wanted him. He is the only one in years who saw a woman in her, and that's why she didn't want him to stop. Those words made him realize why he fell for her in the first place. And because of those words of encouragement, he decided to continue. After a full hour of passionate lovemaking, they finished completely drenched in their sweat. Then they looked at each other with loving eyes and realized that they liked one another so much that they didn't want to stop doing this. What followed then was a shocking affair that made Helen feel alive again. She and Ethan would meet in secret whenever they could. They would meet in hotel rooms or secluded spots in the park. Helen felt like a teenager again, sneaking around and making up excuses to get out of the house. The guilt ate at her, but the excitement and passion were too intoxicating for her to stop. For several months, Helen managed to keep her affair hidden from Richard. She became an expert at lying and covering her tracks. A part of her knew she should end things with Ethan and try to salvage her marriage. But she couldn't bring herself to give up the one thing that brought her joy. She convinced herself that what Richard didn't know wouldn't hurt him. However, her carefully constructed house of cards came crashing down one fateful evening on the 12th of March, 2006. Richard came home early from a business trip and wanted to surprise Helen. Instead, he was the one who received a shocking surprise when he walked in on Helen and Ethan in a compromising position in the master bedroom. The look of utter betrayal and anger on Richard's face would be forever engraved into Helen's memory. He was devastated, and he couldn't believe that his loving wife would do such a thing to him. On the other hand, Ethan was trying to come up with something and explain the situation to Richard, but Richard was not having any of it. He said to him that if he didn't leave his house immediately, he was going to get his gun from the cabinet, and it wouldn't end well for him. Ethan quickly gathered his clothes and left the house, leaving Helen alone to face her husband's wrath. What followed was the most brutal argument of their marriage. Richard shouted insults and accusations at Helen, while his face became red from anger. Helen broke down in tears, torn between shame over her actions and resentment over the years of neglect that drove her to this point. In the days that followed, an icy silence fell over their home. Richard retreated into himself, barely acknowledging Helen's presence. She walked on eggshells around him and wasn't even sure how to begin repairing the damage she caused. She sent Ethan a text ending their relationship, knowing very well that she needed to focus on her marriage. But a part of her was sad about the loss of the passion and connection she had with him. But just as Helen began to think they might be able to move past her infidelity and rebuild their relationship, Richard's demeanor shifted. He became eerily calm and even affectionate towards her. He suggested they take a weekend trip to their lakeside cabin to talk to each other and rest a bit from their stressful lives. Helen was extremely happy when he mentioned that, and she was hoping that this might be a chance to heal. They picked up the things they needed for the trip, and they headed for the cabin in their car. The drive up to the cabin was weird. Richard was trying to have a small talk with her, like everything was already back to normal. She found that strange, but she tried to remain optimistic, telling herself that at least he was making an effort. She knew that this must be harder for him than it was for her, which is why she didn't pay that much attention to the strange calmness of Richard. When they arrived at their cabin, surrounded by a dense forest, she had a sense of worry in her, but she tried to shake it off, reminding herself that this was the man she loved for over a decade. That evening, on the 3rd of April 2006, Richard opened a bottle of wine and suggested they sit out on the dock to watch the sunset. While they were sipping their drinks, he started reminiscing about their early days together. Helen began to relax and thought that maybe they could recapture some of that old magic once again. But then Richard's tone changed. He became bitter as he spoke about the future they were supposed to have had together. He told her that he was thinking of having kids with her and starting up a family, but now that future was ruined because of her betrayal. Helen was surprised by that. She thought that he brought her here in order to reconcile and not rub salt on their wounds. She started apologizing to him, saying that she always dreamed of having kids with him and that she still does it now. There is no reason for them to abandon their future together just because of one affair. She said that she didn't have any feelings for Ethan. She was just using Ethan to sleep with him because he saw in her a woman when Richard didn't. And in the end, she asked him if he was afraid that maybe she was pregnant with Ethan, and that's the reason he no longer wanted to start a family with her. She assured him that they were careful, and that wasn't possible. Richard looked at her and realized that he didn't even think about that possibility, and the thought of him raising another man's child made him nauseous. Then something in him snapped, and before Helen could react, his hands were already around her throat. The look in his eyes was one of pure, unhinged rage. "Did you really think I could ever forgive you, you stupid slut?" he shouted at her, while tightening his grip around her neck. Helen started clawing his hands with her nails while gasping for air. She managed to break free for a second and get on her feet, but Richard caught her immediately. He grabbed her hair and pulled her head back painfully. "I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me?" he said to her. Then he lifted her up and threw her off the dock. She hit the cold water very hard and became disoriented and terrified. When she came out from the water, gasping for air, she saw Richard standing over her with a large rock in his hands. "Richard, please, I'm sorry, we can work this out." She begged him to stop this, but he didn't care at all for her pleas. Then Richard hit her on her head with all his might. Blood started coming from her head and clouding the water around Helen as she struggled to live. But Richard continued hitting her without any remorse. Helen struggled, but she was really hurt, and her consciousness began to slip away. Her last thoughts were a mix of regret, fear, and a desperate wish that she could turn back time. With one final crushing blow, Richard silenced her forever. He stood there staring at Helen's body while it slowly sank beneath the bloody water. After the brutal murder of his wife, a strange calm came over Richard. He cleaned himself up and threw off his bloody clothes. He put rocks on Helen's body to act as weights, and then pushed her to the deepest part of the lake. When he drove home alone in his car, he began constructing his alibi and planning how he would report Helen missing. However, Richard didn't account for one crucial detail, which was Helen's sister Emma. When she heard that they were going to their distant house on the lake, she became really suspicious of Richard. Because Helen told her beforehand about Richard seeing her sleeping with another man, and that was enough of a reason for Emma to suspect the worst happening. Then when Helen missed their weekly phone call and didn't call her back, Emma's concerns grew even bigger. She began her own investigation, speaking to anyone who might have any information regarding her sister. After she realized that no one had seen Helen for over a week, she immediately went to the police. She told them everything, including the affair that Helen had with another man. The revelation of the affair gave investigators a cause to take a closer look at Richard. Then they brought him to the station and started questioning him about Helen and when did he last saw her, and also how did he felt when he found out she was cheating on him. Under intense questioning, the inconsistencies in his story began to emerge. But a few days later, the final nail in Richard's story came when a fisherman discovered some of Helen's personal things that floated to the surface of the lake. He called the police, and they started a search for her. After some time, they uncovered her body, still tied up with rocks on the bottom of the lake. Forensic evidence connected Richard to the murder. In the end, after seeing that they found Helen's body, he confessed that he killed his wife. He was then sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, while Helen's family and friends were left to grapple with the senseless tragedy of her death. Helen's story serves as a reminder of the potentially deadly consequences of infidelity and the dark depths of human jealousy and rage. What began as an innocent search for love and fulfillment ended in unimaginable violence, destroying multiple lives in the process.